everybody. Welcome to Control+M Presents, our bi-weekly session where we share what we know about Plex to help make the community stronger. As a reminder, the session is being recorded and it'll be posted up to our YouTube channel a little bit later this week, along with the others that we've done. So take a few moments to check us out, and if you like what you see, leave us a thumbs up. Today, our Ken Keller, who's on location with one of our newest clients, is going to go back to basics and talk about job production methods. For some of you, this will be a refresher. For others, it's things that you probably went over when you first started configuring Plex, but life gets in the way and distractions happen every day. So sit back and let Ken remind you of some of the power of Plex that you might have forgotten. Ken has been working with Plex since 2004, and I know most of you have probably listened to him speak either here or at PowerPlex. So without any further ado, Ken, please take it away.
Oh, thanks, Patty. As Patty said, I am coming to you live from Los Angeles today. So if there are any technical difficulties, I'm going to blame it on jet lag. But yeah, nice and sunny here in LA. As Patty said, we're going to talk about job production methods today. And she is absolutely correct as always. This will be remedial for some, but it's good to spark discussion, and we're going to talk about that because you may be using Plex a certain way, and there may be a better option for you. We want to talk more today about how you select the right option rather than how we configure that option. For each of these production methods, we could actually present our own webinar for each option. I started thinking about this as I started making this presentation, and I thought, well, we have workshops with our new customers that last hours just to talk about this topic. So we're going to hit this at a high level. So again, welcome everyone. Our agenda today is just getting started with the process. Most of you on the call are existing Plex customers. You're using Plex. You're likely producing something as a manufacturing ERP software. I'm sure you're manufacturing and running production. We're going to talk about how you get started though with the thought process, how you set up parts for production, what you should be thinking about there, how you set up operations and part operation types, setting up process routings for productions, and then what are some of our control panel production options? Some of those that are standard, some of those that might not be standard that you may not know about. We'll talk a little bit about production options without using the control panel, some best application examples for production methods, and then we'll have a Q&A. Being a little bit more remedial with this presentation, kind of a standard out of the box 30,000-foot view of job production methods. I'm leaving a little extra time for Q&A at the end. This is a large topic. So how do we get started when we're trying to design a system in Plex that matches what we do, best fit for us as a company? It's important that you sit down. There are times when you should charge into the fire with with the flag raised. This is not one of them. You should really sit down, relax, grab your drink of choice, a coffee, tea, or scotch, and think, what is it that I need to do when it comes to setting up production in Plex? What does my company do, and what can Plex do for me? A little bit about my background, because those of you that worked with me know that it's all about me, right? So a little bit about my background. I worked for Honda for a little over 20 years, and used the Honda method, the Toyota production system, and both have this philosophy, this principle called Sangen Shugi, which means it's the three realities. Go to the actual spot and see the actual thing and quantify it. So that's really what we need to do when we are configuring Plex to match our production processes. We need to go to that production process. And what is it that we're doing? What do we need to do? Why do we need to do it? What are my requirements? And we'll talk about that a little bit at the end, best application of each one of these options. But I will say this, if I could make one comment in this presentation, it is this. Plex works best when the process matches the actual action that's taken place on your shop floor. One, it'll make sense to your operators and everyone else. Hey, you know, when I bring my container over to my control panel, I print out a label and I stick that label on there, and then I start producing into it. Why do I need that? Well, I need, you know, people need to know what's happening on my shop floor. I have some type of serialization requirements, you know, whatever that may be. Make Plex match what you actually do. It makes sense to everyone, and Plex works best that way. But I'm sure that we've all felt like this dog here when we're starting in Plex, because there are so many settings, you know, tens of thousands of configurable settings. And I heard this little snippet of data a long time ago, but over 1,000 of those are on the control panel itself, or can impact the control panel. Maybe not in the control panel module, but can impact the control panel. So that's a lot for anyone to know, remember, or understand. So we all have that feeling of, I have no idea what I'm doing. Hopefully today we're just going to say at a high level where we get started. So there are a few standard production methods for the control panel. There are some outliers, some fancy stuff, I'm calling it. But the standard production methods for Plex is one called regular or standard production. This is the one that comes out of the box configured for you when you implement Plex. You really don't have to do anything to set it up, but standard production is used where we fill a container with parts over a period of time, and then we say this container is full, and we mark it as full, and now that container is in our inventory as a full container. Sometimes called regular production, but again, the method is the operator starts the container, adds to it over time, and then we determine the container is full when we more or less close it out. Mark the container as full. Another is simplified. Simplified production fills the container immediately. You obviously at the end, we don't want to record production before we actually produce the thing. And I've gone into facilities and seen this before. Many of you on the call likely know what I'm talking about. Operators want to get ahead, and they said, oh, I know I'm going to produce 10 containers, so I'm going to produce them all right now so I get my 10 labels, and then I can produce and slap my labels on. We don't want to do that. But simplified production is somewhat similar. It's saying, hey, I've already produced this thing, so now I'm going to produce a label. If that's what you actually do, then simplified production is best for you. But it's some people see that as simplified being easier. Not necessarily true if it's not what you do. We'll talk a little bit later about why simplified production might be a good option for you. There's also the bin for bin production method. And bin for bin production is used to process a single container from one operation to the next, and it maintains its Plex unique serial number for that container. The serial number itself may mean something to you, that it maintains that serial number, but really what we're talking about with bin for bin is I have a bin full of parts or product, and I'm going to just simply move it through the next operation, change it. It's not becoming something new, it's just maybe maturing. That's a good application for bin for bin. Next, we're going to talk about batch production, or some folks call it variable BOM. But batch processing or batch production records the production of inventory where there is some variable amount of bill of materials. So this container, container one, might have a little bit different source quantity than what you find in container two. We see this a lot in food and beverage. Got a little extra salt in this one, a little extra flour here, a little extra water in this one because it's dry today, or a little less water in this one because it's more humid this afternoon, that sort of thing. So those four are really the primary, I'll call standard production methods on the control panel for a job. Standard production that comes configured for you right out of the box. Simplified production, which requires a little setup that we're going to talk about. Bin for bin production, and batch processing, variable BOM. In Plex, though, many of you might be using what I'll call some fancy stuff. And there are reasons to use the fancy stuff, but just speed of application is not necessarily a good reason to use the fancy stuff. It, again, should match what you actually do. So Heat Treat Manager is one of those. It's, we can process parts through an operation using the Heat Treat Manager instead of the control panel. We can use job picking and packing, also known as kitting. And there is a PowerPlex presentation that I gave this year that if anyone asks, if you want to see that, want to learn more about job picking and packing or kitting, I can make sure that you get a copy of that presentation. But job picking and packing would be, I see this a lot in electronics or where I am in LA today. These folks have huge BOMs, 184 components in a BOM. 84 of those maybe are sub-assemblies that have even more parts in them. So when you start talking about some complex assembly with loads and loads of parts, when you're on that control panel and you're loading, you've got to load those containers, that can be pretty cumbersome. And so in reality, what this company does is they take their parts and they put them into a kit. They pick the proper amount, the right amount of wire, the correct amount of washers, the correct amount of dials and indicators and buttons and all of that, and they put it into a box. They can kit that into a single container. It's unassembled, but Plex would then see that as a kit that represents the thing that we're going to assemble. We can do this by operation, or we can do it at the first operation, a kitting operation, and then we can process through. And that opens up all kinds of other options to us, like bin for bin. Then we just process it through. We assemble the first 20 components in the kit in the second operations. We assemble a bit more in the next operation, but at least all the source is there. We don't have to continuously load. So job picking and packing, or kitting, is a job production method that does not use the control panel. What is interesting, though, it does use work centers, and you can see it on the control panel if you see fit. You just use a different screen to actually process. Audit Container is another method, and many of you have found that ability to move a container from one operation to the next using Audit Container. We can set up an Audit Container on a control panel session, but if we do it without the control panel, obviously we lose the ability to record labor time, the operator's time clocking in and clocking out of a job. So for those of you that are standard cost, something that needs to be considered. All of these Heat Treat Manager, Job Picking, Packing, Audit Container, those three would require different methods for recording the operator's time. Cell operations, so I'm sure a few of you on this call actually use cell operations, but I consider that fancy stuff. The cell operations can be considered the control panel, a control panel production method, but you don't actually click the produce button or load source at that operation. It processes through the operation from the previous ops or previous op or ops to the one that we're actually producing. Same with multi-out production. It's a way for us to produce a part by producing another part, and I consider that a little fancy and kind of outside of the control panel. And same thing with pack containers to boxes, which we can set up at the control panel, but we could also process in its own screen. a way to take a bulk container and create multiple containers from it. So the main things we really want to talk about in this presentation are those 4 primaries: batch production, bin for bin, simplified, and standard production. But just know that, whatever your scenario is, whatever your production method is, there is likely a solution in Plex. Key takeaway there. So where do we get started with setting up our parts? Now that we've kind of determined which method maybe that we want to use, how do I make sure that I've set things up correctly? So the configuration of your parts can influence how that control panel operates. I've just chosen a couple key fields here in settings that can be used to set up parts and influence the way the control panel works. One of those would be serialized. So in most PCNs, when your PCN is created, this setting is not enabled, so you may not know that you own it, or that you have it. But there is a setting that turns on a serialized flag on the part screen, on the parts detail screen, that allows you to assign internal or a customer supplied serial number to your parts to the container serial number, so associated with the Plex container serial number. That can be recorded at production on a control panel. So folks that have maybe stamped serial numbers in their products, or they rivet on some kind of plate with a serial number, or they throw it on some documentation and they track for warranty purposes or other reasons, maybe some kind of governmental requirements or customer requirements that things be serialized. We can track those in Plex. So that's all done with a serialized flag at part setup. We can make parts lot required. That will certainly have an impact on the control panel. It assigns a lot number to the output containers when we're recording production on the control panel, all based upon a setting on the part detail screen that says this part is lot required. In order for it to work correctly, we have to set up lot formats and other things in the Plex UX lot management system. That is a key setting, which is what we're talking about here for setting up parts for production and that lot management system. If you don't need lot management, clicking that can have some dire impacts. So we warn you a little bit about that. Those of you that get new UX PCNs, it's there, and you may wonder what it is if you're not using lot management. We can send a case to Plex to turn it off, just to prevent someone from accidentally setting it up if you don't use it. So just be aware of that. Another is approved container types, setting up parts for production. On the approved container type or container type screen, we can default standard quantities and container statuses when we associate that with the part in the process routing. And so when we're on the control panel, we can default, and we can default statuses, default quantities. And oftentimes I hear a customer say, hey, Plex is clicky. I don't like my operators clicking all these buttons. And so they do something like go from regular production to simplified, thinking that will do it. Or they go from standard production to bin for bin, thinking that might do it. Or they set up a cell, so they skip operations and not having to produce. Well, if that doesn't match what you actually do, that's probably the wrong step. Know in Plex that there are multiple places for us to default things that the operator does not have to input unless they need to override. Approved container types handles a lot of that. So continuing on with setting up parts for production, this is just an example here, looking at a part detail screen. You can see that the serialized flag is turned on. It can be checked, and if we check that for that part, this part then becomes available when it's on the control panel to have a serialized number placed there, and either customer supplied or your own serialized sequence. There are many, many, many settings, at least 24 settings that can impact how that serialization works. So I'm not going to bore you. I would have another webinar on just that topic. Maybe we will have one just on setting up parts for serialization. But that's just want to let you know that it's available there. BOM substitutions, lot requirements, those are all settings that impact production on the control panel that are at the part level, set up at the part level. Next, we're going to talk about setting up operations and part operation types. So, what are operations? Any property of the operation in a process routing affects the way the control panel operates. So some examples include like units of measure. So if you're setting up a part and you apply a certain operation to the operation type, to the part operation, unit of measure, just know that those come from the operations themselves. So when you add that operation to the process routing, it becomes a part operation. The unit of measure is from the operation itself. And a great example would be something that you receive. So most of you know, hopefully, that when I receive something in, if I want to receive it in pounds, then I need an inventory unit of pounds associated with that operation code. It's truly that operation called receive in pounds that has an inventory unit of pounds that makes it receive in pounds. And if we had an operation that was where we wanted to receive in feet or receive in pieces, obviously we have to set those up. Doesn't have to impact just receiving. We can set those up for other operations as well. But in this example, this is a receiving operation code, but it's receiving in pounds. So on the operation detail screen, we designate an inventory unit of pounds, and this receiving operation now becomes receiving pounds. So when I receive, and I've attached this operation to a part op type in a process routing or a purchase part, I'm going to receive in pounds. How do we set up operation types, and what impact does that have on job production methods? Setting up an operation type controls whether you use the control panel to record production. So this is really the key, is the operation type. This is where you would set up simplified production versus standard. So it's important to note that standard production is just that. There's no real configuration required. If I don't tell Plex in an operation type that we're going to be using simplified production for a part, it will use standard production. I have to tell it something other than standard production for something other to occur. A key note here is that when you're setting up these production operations, you should have the auto create run record, the schedule flag checked in order to run production at the control panel. So something key there. So, many of the operation types, when you get your PCN, are already going to be set up. But if you're going to dabble in test, which we'll talk about in a moment, just make sure your operation and operation types are set up correctly. So this is a good example here of an operation type. We're calling this one production simplified, so that when I select it from a list, I know exactly what it's doing. What it's doing is configured by the flags that are below it. So in this example, I've created an operation type called production simplified. It has the simplified record production flag checked, and that's what makes that work. If that gets attached to a part in our process routing, when we run that part will use the simplified production, which is, again, is a simple one-click produce versus the standard production, open the container or start a new container, and then close the container by marking the container full. Let's talk a little bit about setting up process routings and part operation types for production. The part operation types controls that behavior of the control panel in ways similar to the operation that we just showed, but these controls are specific to the parts to which the operations are added. And so that's, part operation types designate operations like production and receiving and sell and rework and packaging, et cetera. So when I create, in this case, a process routing for a specific part, I'm saying what the operation is, what operation code that I'm using, so that receive in pounds again, that I set up earlier, which will allow me to receive in the inventory unit of pounds, but then the operation type would determine whether this is a production op, or if it's a receiving op, or if it's a rework op, that sort of thing. All right, so let's talk about control panel production options before we talk about the fancy stuff. But again, standard production, no setup is required on the control panel really to use this. It's used automatically unless the control panel is configured for simplified, bin for bin, cell, etc. Simplified production, we just showed, is used when the simplified record production flag is turned on the operation type. We do that, we change from the standard production, the standard setup that doesn't require configuration, to simplified, which does require this configuration. Sorry about my little, there's my first technical glitch. Sorry about that. Bin for bin production is not simplified production. Bin for bin production is where we're processing a container and maintaining that container's serial number. We're just moving that same bin through the next operation. So essentially we're just saying we're loading that serial number and saying we're going to move it to the next operation. We're not loading source. The source is the bin. Batch production and batch processing allows for that variable amount of source. So these are our primary control panel options to make a process use batch production. We have to turn on the variable bomb flag within the operation. So again, controlled at the operation level. Very few, well, none of these are actually controlled with control panel settings. We can change flavor of how it works and all the bells and whistles, but standard production, simplified production, bin for bin, and batch production are either at the operation or operation type level to turn those on. So if you're looking for these and you're looking at settings on the control panel, you're not going to find them there. Some of the production options without using control panel, and there are multiple that I showed before. I'm just highlighting a few key ones that I think would benefit the community. One is job picking and packing. That's set up with an operation with a fabrication flag on the operation. So in Plex, job picking and packing, kitting, fabrication, all kind of used, those terms used interchangeably. So if we turn on the fab field in an operation, let's say I'll call the operation kitting or kit with a operation type of standard production. We don't have to really configure that operation type because it's not going to control this. It's going to be controlled at the operation for the kitting. If we do this, it actually uses a different screen for loading, picking source from a job bomb, and creates a kit. In my example that I gave in the PowerPlex presentation, many of you know kitting, you use them every day. So I'm going to steal this one from my colleague who's a genius, but she said that kitting truly is, if you think about prepared or kitted meals like HelloFresh or Blue Apron or something like that, you're getting a box, but it's unassembled for you to assemble. That's the kit. You got everything that you need there in the proper quantities, and your job is to mix it all together. But you as the consumer do it. You as the customer do it. What if you did that internally? What if you created a kit in the first operation and then just moved that kit to the second operation and you did the assembly internally? What benefit do you get from that? The benefit is you don't have to load any of that source at the control panel. You're just simply loading a box in a kit. So the job picking packing screen is pretty cool little option for those folks that have many BOM components. But again, only a good application if that's what you actually do on your production floor. And again, I can get you a copy of that presentation. Just make sure you get in touch with us after this presentation. Make sure it gets to you. So what are some application examples for the production methods that we just talked about? Just give you some example questions when you sit down and think about it and say, what is it we actually do? What should Plex do for us? Do my jobs take a long time to complete? Meaning, they extend from one day to the next, or maybe one shift to the next. Or maybe my production managers and others want to see efficiency reports by the hour or by the shift. If we have long jobs and I use simplified production, I don't get a record until I actually hit the produce button. So it may look like it took a long time to produce this thing. If from the efficiency standpoint. If I use standard production, I can say, well, just record whatever you've made each hour, or even if every, 1 hour for 45 minutes here. At least we've got production records that are going to give us a better indication of how well we're doing during the job, as the job is progressing, rather than just at the end of the produced container. So do my jobs last a long time? You should likely be using standard production. Another question, do I palletize containers with standard pack sizes? So meaning, hey, I ship out pallets to my customer and every pallet has 100 containers of 10 pieces in those 100 containers. Simplified production is probably a great option for you because you can produce all of those containers at once, palletize them with the master unit, and get all the labels at once and label them up on the bottom, right there on the pallet. See that a lot in food and beverage as well, but that would be a great application of simplified production. Again, if those containers varied quantities, if they took a long time to produce, if I needed to create a label as I was producing into it, then it wouldn't be a good opportunity for simplified. That would be standard. Do my BOM quantities vary each container? So one container have 10 pounds of flour, but the other container has 9 because of some condition like humidity or whatever. You're likely going to need variable BOM to match your actual process. And like I said, we see this in most cases in process manufacturing, especially food and bev. Again, do I need a label on a container before completing production? So I have a inventoried container and I'm building production into it slowly, standard production. Do I kit? That would be our job picking and packing screen. Do I process a container with the same serial number through the operations? Well, that would be a great application for bin. So I've just come up with, 6, 7 questions here. As you sit down and think about the best production methods for you, your list likely could be in the dozens, maybe over 100 questions that you should ask. The one thing that Patty would likely jump in here and say is, hey, where are my accounting questions? We need to include the accountants, and absolutely we do. So let's talk about some key takeaways from this presentation before we get into Q&A. But the primary one is just think before you leap. Many of you have been using Plex for a while, as Patty said. Things are probably going well, but you're just thinking, hey, how can we optimize this? Are we using the right thing? We got started and it was a whirlwind. We were drinking through a fire hose and we said, hey, standard production looks best for us. Now we're thinking, hey, maybe one of these other production methods is better for us. Again, think, put that checklist together, ask all those questions, understand all your options and requirements, and speak with your accountants. And I threw a wink in there because you should do that always when it comes to production, because all of those transactions from production to scrap, they definitely have an implication, and we all do this to make money. So let's make our accountants happy. Simple is best, and that goes for probably that's a life lesson there. But so we can make Plex be as fancy as most customers need, but with fancy comes complexities and the requirement for discipline. And that's a tough thing when you're talking, all the different personalities and just sheer number typically of people on our shop floor. So keeping it simple is best just because that's manageable. There are times when complexities and those cool little fancy things work for us, but if they're not needed, don't use them. The big takeaway here should be match the actual production condition. Go out to the shop floor, see what what your folks are actually doing. If they actually do open a container and start slowly filling into that should be standard production. If we're palletizing, multiple containers on a single pallet, same quantities. Hey, container types, approved container types with standard packs, simplified production to throw all those in a container quickly. Master units that can be applied at the control panel. And with every change to a production method, any process in Plex, test it first. There's a lot of good information coming out of Plex now in the form of the community, the Knowledge Center in UX, the Plex Education Portal. I think that knowledge is leading people to try these new things because they're feeling comfortable. And I think that's a great thing. And with Plex, we have the tools to test it and not have that be a risk. Not we can airproof it by simply using the test environment to say, hey, what does this button do? What does this flag do? So test, always test first. And if you're hanging your head, chin up, there's likely an option for you with some of those things that we just discussed. This was high level remedial, but just a reminder that there are other ways to do things in Plex, maybe other than what you're doing now. Our job is just to make sure that you're using the best one for you, the optimal one. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
I just want to remind everybody that you are probably on mute. So if you have questions for Ken, make sure you take yourself off of mute. Ken, it looks like it's pretty quiet out there. You covered a lot of really good information. Here we go.
So, I don't know if this is my turn to talk, but we use bin to bin while we receive from subcontract operations, and we weren't sure if that was the correct way to do it, or if we should be trying, using like the changing the serial number after subcontract operation.
Do you receive the same container back that you sent?
It's set for bin to bin, yes.
But I guess I'm asking, do you really get the same container back? Because if you really get the same container back, great. If you don't, you could consider switching serial numbers. But Ken, I don't know about you. I don't know that it really makes a difference.
The questions I would ask there would be if we sent 10 in a container to the subcontractor, did they send 10 back? If we sent the same 10 to the subcontractor, did they send the same 10 back? The big advantage of using bin for bin and the subcontract receive is we've got great traceability there, a clean trace from operation to operation, from the time we send it to the subcontractor until the time it came back. So those are the questions that I would ask. I don't know the answer to those for you, but I don't think there's any harm in using bin for bin if that's what's actually happening, as Patty said. My experience from my Honda days if we sent something to a subcontractor, there was no guarantee that what they were sending back to us was the same container, even if it was coming back in one of our containers with a serial number on it. The parts may not be the same, or maybe not be the same quantity. Make sense?
Yeah, and I would agree that that's how our process is with our subcontractors. It's never, it might be the same quantity, but no guarantee that it's the same parts, and the quantity could also be slightly different.
Yep. Gotcha. So there is, I don't want to put any fears in anyone's head. If you don't use bin for bin in that subcontract, you don't lose full traceability. You're just saying, hey, when it was at the subcontractor, it was there over these days, and these are you can easily track the parts that you have at a subcontractor from day in and day out, and that's where your traceability would lie. You just pick up your true traceability back when you add your inventory from the subcontract receive process, not using bin for bin. Okay.
Okay.
Good question.
Great question. And speaking of subcontract, maybe some folks aren't using it. That is truly a production option. Doesn't use the control panel, but it's set up just like these other operations that we're talking about. And so I can because we're processing them through an operation, I consider subcontract a production operation.
I do too, Ken, and I just want to share with everybody, I recently talked to a client who was not aware that Plex handled subcontract operations. So what we mean by this is, let's say, for example, that you make washers and then you send them out to be dipped in glitter, okay? This customer was actually making the washers, creating a sales order, shipping them out to themselves, and then basically rebuying the washers from the glitter dippers. So they were doing so much extra work because they didn't really understand that Plex had an option that says you can send this tote of washers out, have it dipped in glitter, and bring it back as the same tote. So if you're struggling with subcontract or you're selling to yourself for any reason, give us a call and let us help you walk through that process, because we were able to help this client save a ton of time. Just entering and fulfilling an order to ship to themselves was spending quite a bit of time that they didn't need to spend. Heidi, I see that you got your hand up. I'm not sure if you're clapping for Ken or you want to come join us. Got a question? Well, Ken, I think we don't have too many more questions. So if you don't mind, let's talk about next week. So our next session is going to be a free-form session backed by popular demand. A couple months back, we held a session about TLS, and it sort of turned into an open-ended forum for folks who had technical issues to ask questions about things like IAM or rolling Plex out to different types of hardware like iPads or Android tablets. Everyone's welcome, and obviously we can't promise to answer every question that you throw at us, but we'll sure give it our best try. And who knows, maybe you'll meet some like-minded folks to connect with on the Plex community. So Ken, thank you so much. Great job today, as always. We appreciate you joining us on location out in sunny LA. It seems like when we use the Control+M Presents forum to go deep into the basics, we always get great attendance because the process of implementation really is the same for everybody. We make you drink through a fire hose when you're learning Plex, and remembering all that isn't always easy. And business changes happen daily. Never more obvious than with this pandemic. So reviews of these basics should always give you something to think about, like how to leverage these options to make your manufacturing floor transactions in Plex match reality. So thanks again for joining us, everybody. We know your time is valuable and we appreciate you giving some of it to us. Don't forget about our YouTube channel. All our older content is out there and some now in Spanish, and we're adding new videos every day. So thanks again and have a great day and stay healthy, everybody. Take care. Ken, awesome job. You rock at this.